Firstly, to begin, I would like to invite my colleague, Djon Mundine, to acknowledge country.
Yes, well, I'd just like to say that we all would like to acknowledge that this meeting or this conference and the exhibition is on the land of the Gadigal people, and that we would like to acknowledge, I can only acknowledge it, I'm not really from here, but that I would like to acknowledge that this takes place on the land of the Gadigal people. And when we think about Aboriginal people, we think that they're, as I think, their problems are my problems. They are my family's problems, and they are the problems of all Aboriginal people. And we would like to acknowledge that and thank them for allowing us to be on this beautiful country. Thank you.
Thank you, Djon. I'd like to start today's discussion by locating us in Wart's current exhibition at Rogue Pop-Up. Then Beck Dean will speak about her experience as a curator working with artists with disability, and then Djon Mundine will do similar. This should bring us to around the 40-minute mark, when questions and answers will begin and when Wart will join us. I'll ask the speakers a question each, and then you, our audience, are warmly invited to ask questions of Wart, Beck, Djon, and me. Without COVID, this event, of course, would be happening in Rogue Pop-Up Gallery in Redfern. But Sydney is in lockdown, and here we are connecting virtually because Wart's work is so compelling, and because the agenda she has set, a discussion focusing on curators working with artists with disability, is important. But for me, the fundamental thing today is Wart is a very fine artist. I see pink, black and white is a kind of reckoning or face-off between two very different birds, the flamingo and the ibis, one celebrated for its beauty, one reviled for both its looks and its habits. In the exhibition essay, Daniel Moody Cunningham, who I'm thrilled to say has joined us in the audience, writes, Wart sides with the ibis and takes the piss out of the flamingo, celebrating the ostracised bird for not conforming to conventional ideas of what's beautiful. But to me, the artworks depicting the flamingo do look like meditations on the bird's beauty. So last night I texted Wart asking just how much piss she is taking out of the flamingo. And she answered, a bit of both, taking the piss and enjoying them, scrutiny and ostracization. They are so iconic, I had to pull them apart a bit. You know that saying, pretty and stupid. Looking at these works, I wonder at Wart's capacity to render these birds, often in a flurry of action, so accurately and with such economy. It's actually the titles that are often the key to the ironical position she takes. Eggshell babies, for example, they're clearly rather fragile in the artist's opinion. And it's a flamingo. But actually, as Daniel Moody Cunningham points out in his essay, the collective noun for these birds is a flamboyance. Wart has had close experience of flamingos, and I think it's seen here really clearly in this really remarkable drawing. In 1993, she visited the Ngorongoro crater in northern Tanzania, where she saw flamingos in the wild. Then in 2018, while on an artist residency in Venice, she learnt about the flamingos that had migrated to that fine city. Rejects. I hope I get to ask what is rejected about these birds. They look like iconic examples of the species. Shake your tails, again, this very kind of intuitive and highly successful response to actually what they're doing in nature. They're very, like her kind of understanding of animals, as anyone who knows Wart's work. She's done wonderful series in the past on her dog Kero. She is really attuned with animals, and you can see it very clearly in all of these works, such as Anticipation. The next three works, in my opinion, look very much like a single work of three, or a triptych. And they clearly have a kind of ironical tone that seem to be critiquing what could be called a somewhat vacuous, good-looking species in these works: neck, leg, and flaps. Love a long neck is, of course, the neck is almost a long neck is almost a cliched signifier of conventional beauty. And here, are these birds lazy as well? Is all they do sleep and flap? And just looking at this work, just note the amazing kind of, again, the economy of this artist's hand, and such a powerful depiction and so abstracted. The final word in book in this series, I'm over here, look here. Clearly, she regards these birds as attention seekers. So while Wart critically unpacks the beauty of the flamingo, she champions the ibis. Never has the ibis been so closely scrutinised by an artist, for one. Never has it looked so dignified, so thoughtful, and so characterful. Wart's flamingos are flocks, and if represented singly, they feel archetypal, if not stereotypical at times, whereas the ibises are individuals. I'd just like to go through these really remarkable mixed media works. Again, they feel confidently put together, and there's never a missed mark in these beautiful and really complex works. And again, with the newspaper, we get a material reference to the kind of conventional status of the ibis. Here, Batlashes, who would have thought such a title would be given to an ibis? Such economy in the mark making and in the choice of media. Such fine work. And you often find a little bit of naughtiness in the titles. I just want to quote again from Daniel. In the exhibition at Rogue Pop-Up, this piece definitely feels like the culmination of the show, which is unfair to the rest of the show because it is all so stunning. But this work, this installation, takes up a single room. And I'd like to again borrow from you, Daniel, insightful words about this work, where you talk about Wart's affinity with the ibis. And as Daniel says, it is especially pronounced in this installation, You Are Being Watched, where Wart presents an ominous wall of eyes comprised of multiple paintings of ibis eyeballs gazing at a viewer. And then, of course, you can see the bin chicken rendered in neon on a bin itself. Daniel continues, there is a deeply personal reason for Wart's attraction to a stigmatised outsider like the ibis. For Wart, the multiplicity of bird eyes suggest paranoia and speak to the surveillance we experience in everyday life. As a person living with mental illness since her schizoaffective diagnosis in the late 80s, Wart likens the eyes to the surveillance and scrutiny patients are subjected to when under constant observation in psychiatric wards. But, as Daniel points out, and I continue to quote, while the ibis's outsider status may mirror Wart's lived experience of mental illness, her work cannot be framed as outsider art. Wart is not an outsider artist, having formally trained at art school in the late 70s with a stellar 4 decades and counting career, exhibiting and performing in the Australian art world. And my postscript to Daniel's very fine words, we are all the much richer for that stellar career. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Bec Dean. Bec is a curator, writer, educator and consultant with an artistic background in photo media and performance art. She is presently working as Senior Manager of Policy and Partnerships at Create New South Wales, the New South Wales State Arts Funding Agency. In 2017, she worked for the National Institute of Experimental Arts at the University of New South Wales on the Big Anxiety Festival. And in 2019, she curated the festival's major exhibition, The Empathy Clinic, with Professor Jill Bennett, and also How the City Cares at Customs House in Sydney. Beck's independent curatorial project, The Patient, the medical subject in contemporary art, premiered in Sydney in 2016 and toured to regional New South Wales and South Australia. Beck has worked for multidisciplinary contemporary arts organisations in Australia since 1996 and has been curating interdisciplinary experimental exhibitions and events for 2 decades. She was Associate Director of Performance Space Sydney from 2007 to 2012 and co-director and CEO from 2012 to 14. She was curator at the Australian Centre for Photography from 2005 to 2007. In 2018-19, Beck presented The Constellations, a 12-episode podcast on interdisciplinary arts produced by Deluxe Media Arts and FBI Radio. She was lead curator of Cementa 19, Candos, and is currently a board member of Sydney-based contemporary performance company, Branch Nebula. Thank you, Beck.
Hello, good afternoon. I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking and here on the land of the Bidjigal people, which is also where Anne is, because we actually both live in the same suburb, which is kind of very funny at the moment. Now we're all in lockdown. I just want to thank everybody and thank Wart for bringing us all together, really. I mean, it's kind of, it's really great that Wart has sort of taken this initiative to have a range of wider discussions around her work, her fabulous exhibition, which has been cut short by the pandemic. And given where we are at the moment, probably won't be able to reopen again, which is it's a real shame. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to celebrate Wart's work here. So I'm going to take you guys through a couple of projects that have occupied me for quite a few years. I'm an interdisciplinary curator largely, and so I come at this question around working with artists and disability through that frame. And so I kind of just wanted to unpack that a little bit before I start, because both of the projects that I'm going to talk about, The Patient and the Empathy Clinic, are working with artists with lived experience. And that lived experience is part of the work that those artists produce, and it's embedded in that work. But obviously, I don't think that this is the way that one should always work with artists with disability, that they need to be performing their disability somehow. And I think it probably requires us actually to think about what disability really is, and that it is actually a part of human diversity. It's a part of our experience of the world, and that we have about over 4 million people in Australia that identify as living with disability. And as we age, we are much more likely to become a person with disability. And so I think for us to consider the art world, it's very likely that there are a lot of artists out there practicing at the moment that you might not consider have a disability, but they probably, or they might do, or they might have a close relationship with people with disability. So I just kind of wanted to start off by sort of talking about that a little bit, and I'll talk more about those ideas as we go through these slides. So when I was working at Performance Space, I had this kind of really very potent sort of experience over a couple of years working with a number of different artists that were engaging with the medical sector and experience of medicine, but from the perspective of the patient. that inquiry, I guess, rolled into my PhD, which occupied me for some years. So firstly, I've got this slide here of Peter Clancy and Helen Pinor's project, The Body is a Big Place. Peter and Helen, for this project, were working with a transplant community in Melbourne. They were working with a transplant swim team, and were really kind of trying to express this kind of liminal space of living with somebody else's organ inside you. I won't talk too much through these slides because we'll be here all day, but this process of actually working with communities of lived experience to create this very multidimensional work was really interesting, and also led me through the connection with the next artist on the next slide, which is Bianca Willoughby. And so their work, Body Fluid, at this time, so I'd done a previous iteration of this work, commissioned a previous iteration of this work with them in 2010 for Performance Space, and we revisited the work in a different way in 2013 as an installation that was performative. And this is where Bianca was performing during the course of a peritoneal dialysis treatment, which is 10 hours. So people who are on peritoneal dialysis for renal failure are basically hooked up to a machine for 10 hours a day while body fluids kind of transfer. And Bianca was really interested in creating a space for people to be present with them during this performance, and to sort of take in ideas of life and death and renewal, and actually have that sort of meditative kind of experience with them in this space. And I went on to work with Bianca for many more years. So this was a really kind of important sort of moment for me as a curatorial practitioner at this point. So we can move on in the slides. So I've just got some installation views of the project that I brought together for my practice-based research for my PhD. And the project was called The Patient, the Medical Subject in Contemporary Art. And this project was working with artists with lived experience. So working again with Bianca, working with Eugenie Lee, whose images will appear later, and others, as well as engaging with the history of this this work through the sort of recent contemporary. So basically from the 70s until the sort of 2010s. And I was able to, you know, bring in some of my art heroes really for this project, which was just extraordinary. So I was able to work with Cherie Rose, who is the surviving partner of Bob Flanagan, who was just an incredible artist working in the 80s and 90s with cystic fibrosis. Cherie was able to actually come out to Sydney and do some performances here, which was so wonderful. Also engaged with Carol Jerram's work, the Hobart Hospital series, and got access to her diaries, which was really incredible at that time. Jo Spence, an artist who was working in the 70s, 80s and 90s in the UK. It was just a really wonderful opportunity to sort of bring together, I guess, these ideas about artists who were in the situation of being medical patients, actually looking back at the medical gaze. And the medical gaze is something that was identified by the French philosopher Michel Foucault, who did a lot of work around institutional power structures and the way that we're sort of driven to behave in the world. And I think that this idea of the medical gaze also kind of coincides with theories that followed later about the social theory of disability, and the medical model of disability. So the medical model of disability holds that you have a problem that needs to be fixed, and that's basically what that model is about. So that's a sort of diagnostic kind of a medical gaze around disability. The social model of disability basically tells us that you know, as I mentioned, we have a range of experiences around ability as part of human experience, and it's actually our societies that create barriers for people and their interactions and their engagements. So all of these things start to come together around this exhibition. So it was a really rich opportunity to engage with artists both living and dead, and their surviving families and partners. And yeah, that was a really kind of important part of my life for the last few years. So we can just go through some of these slides, some exhibition images, that wall of images in the next image. This is the Wall of Pain by Bob Flanagan and Cherie Rose, which is actually images of Bob's reaction to Cherie hitting him with various objects. Bob was a famous masochist and he enjoyed it rather a lot. So moving on. So this is other work. This is work with Bianca Willoughby, Circles of Fire Variations. Bianca is a successful transplant patient, and they made an amazing work around this, as well as I was able to be a producer on the next stage of this work, which was a performance called Circles of Fire Amphitheatre. If you move on to the next, and this is work by Eugenie Lee, who is an artist who has chronic pain, and this basically is an opportunity for to kind of turn the tables a bit on the audience and actually bring them into this kind of rich media landscape, which is kind of provided by virtual reality, as well as haptics that kind of simulate this kind of sense of what it means to have chronic pain, if only for a short amount of time. I think I've got some, oh yes, and this is an image of inside the VR. So inside that VR that Eugenie has made, people get to experience this sense of pressure around their hand, while seeing an image of their hand in space kind of expanding and getting swollen, while these kind of horrific images kind of move towards them. And this is a project that was co-curated with Jill Bennett, Professor Jill Bennett, who is at UNSW. This was the Empathy Clinic, and this sort of in a similar way to the way Eugenie was kind of creating a space for people to have this kind of very rich media experience. The Empathy Clinic was conceived in a similar way to sort of bring people into different people's experiences, lived experiences of mental health. And if you just go one slide on, this is me inside the installation that Wart and Phil Downing brought together for the Empathy Clinic. I was able to work with a fabulous designer, Anna Triglowan, for this exhibition. And so when we were talking about working with Wart, Wart has these incredible paintings which she did just after a period of hospitalisation, and they're very poignant images, and they're made with like tar and paint together. And so you'll see on the left-hand side of this slide, there is this image of Wart's original work, I think from the 90s. And I've always been in love with Wart's voice and Wart's poetry. And in this work, we bring together the poetry, Wart's voice, her piano playing, her musical sensibility, some amazing poems, in this work, where you're actually able to have this quite comfortable experience while listening to Wart's beautiful voice and listening to what are actually quite challenging kind of poems around a particular time in her life. And we would, throughout the course of this exhibition, actually find people cuddled up in this space and almost asleep listening to this work. And so I just wanted to, I guess, finish on this image of Wart's beautiful work.
Thank you, Beck. That was so great. It's now my pleasure to introduce Djon Mundine. Djon Mundine OAM is a proud Bundjalung man from the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. He is a curator, writer, artist and activist, and is celebrated as a foundational figure in the criticism and exhibition of contemporary Aboriginal art. Djon has held many senior curatorial positions in both national and international institutions, including the National Museum of Australia, the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and Campbelltown Art Centre. Between 79 and 95, Mundine was the art advisor at Milingimbi and curator at Bulla Bulla Arts in Ramingining, Arnhem Land. He was also the concept artist producer of the Aboriginal Memorial, comprising 200 painted poles by 43 artists from Ramingining, each symbolising a year since the 1788 British invasion. The memorial was central to the 1988 Biennale of Sydney and remains on permanent display at the National Gallery of Australia in the entrance hall. In 1993, Djon Mundine received the Medal of the Order of Australia for service to the promotion and development of Aboriginal arts, crafts and culture. Between 2005 and 6, he was resident at the National Museum of Ethnography in Osaka, Japan, as a research professor. In 2020, Djon Mundine was awarded the Australia Council's Red Ochre Award for Lifetime Achievement. He is currently an independent curator of contemporary Indigenous art and a cultural mentor. Thank you, Djon.
I'm really happy to be here. I have a personal connection really to Wart. I have been aware of her in the Sydney art scene for a while in my career as a curator, but in fact it's through my partner Anne-Marie Dalziel, who has known Wart for a very long time, since childhood, that I came to meet and spend time with Wart, or Jen Wart, and then came to know her in a personal way, really first, before I got to know her artistically. And this exhibition, I've came to be in a number of conversations with Wart about how this exhibition was going to be composed, how it was going to be hung, what were the points about it. And originally, when I was in conversation with Wart, really the center point, the flamingos were really the center point of this exhibition, rather than the ibises that seemed to come along a bit later. The ibis is a different beast, of course, to the flamingo. Originally, she wanted to make a point, or she explained to me a very sharp political point that she was trying to make a comment on about what's called the pink tax. It's something that people don't see. It's again about this idea of artists with disabilities. Well, look, as a curator and an art organizer, I can tell you most artists seem to have an incredible disability. Some of those people, they're with the egos they have, they are eternally damaged and challenged. So I've never thought of anyone really being particularly challenged in that way. I've just thought they were artists, they had these abilities, and therefore they were part of an exhibition because of what they were saying. So this thing with Wart now about the pink tax, a very poignant, very sharp statement about how everything in our society, in our world, and it's been this way since anything to do with women, an object was always about twice or three times as expensive as a simple tool, utensil, etc., that other people might use. And say, like a razor, if it was a women's razor, it would be much more expensive than a men's razor. Anything you can name, a comb, whatever, socks, if they're labeled or marketed as women's objects, they are twice or three times as much, or even more so, more expensive than women's objects that were in the marketplace. And it's this stupidity, this oppression, and this criminality, really, is like extortion that's constantly being placed on women right throughout everything they do, right from the beginning of their lives, in fact. And I was really touched by the thought of this. And when you think of, we just talked a little bit about flamingos and ibises. Flamingos that have to be like the ultimate image of tall, long-legged, long-necked, pink, beautiful woman. That's how they would be seen, and how they walk. It's like they're walking on high heels, incredible high heels, etc. So this idea of using the image was so apt. I just thought, this is fantastic. This is going to be a great exhibition. And I never saw this as, this is such a clear message that it could apply to, well, it does apply to all women, and it applies to everyone in the community, in our society. I never saw it as a disability problem. A while ago, I took an exhibition to China, to southern China, and I was looking at, I work mainly in the field of Aboriginal art, and I was looking at artists who were of Aboriginal and Chinese descent. And one of my best friends, long-term friends from Darwin, is a man called Gary Lee. When I first went to Darwin and to Remenginning, Milingimbi and Remenginning in the early 70s, he was one of the first Aboriginal people I met in Darwin, one of the first Aboriginal artists, in fact, in Darwin that I'd met. And so I've known him since 79. But lately, he's through a stroke, he has difficulty moving, and he normally goes around in a wheelchair. He can stand, he can walk, but not as well. So he has to go around in a wheelchair. And I remember being in that tour, we went to a number of cities in China with this exhibition and gave a number of talks. And another Australian artist said to me, that is really fantastic. You brought Gary along, and, Gary's in a wheelchair. And I just thought I never thought of it as being a problem. He was an artist, and he was in the category of this exhibition. It wasn't about people with disabilities, although there were definitely was about people being who had the social disability of being discriminated against, both on their Asian heritage and, of course, on their Aboriginal heritage, because Aboriginal people and all minorities really are people that then live with a social disability. that in our time is most probably seemingly getting better, but in other ways just becoming increasingly more difficult to deal with in this society. The society it seems to go, what do they say, 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. It's a very slow progress. So I thought that this was just great art, what she was doing. It was great art, both in a craftsmanship's idea, a draftsmanship idea. It was also politically a great, very grounded art exhibition that was saying something very, very important. Now, the idea, of course, of using birds and animals as devices or as metaphors for outcast, Aboriginal people are outcast. We're on the fringes of things. We are under surveillance by the police and just by the neighbours. And we make up a huge number, a huge percentage of people that are incarcerated for basically nuisance crimes. I think it's maybe up 30 to 50% of inmates are in jails are Aboriginal women in the women's jails, and a similar figure, 30, 50%, of course, are incarcerated in male jails. So we know what it means to be under surveillance, that you can be harassed if you're in a place that someone will ask, what are you doing here? Even one of my cousins was driving a BMW and he was pulled over and they checked his license and blah, blah. It was basically about, well, you're an Aboriginal. How come you're driving a BMW? You must have stolen it. So those things are all people in minorities are people that are really harassed, picked on, and so on. Now, I came to do an exhibition by default, in a way, with Lismore Regional Gallery in New South Wales. They were having a new building built or renovated and moving to a bigger space to work in. And they asked me to do an exhibition. Now, in the early 60s, there was another minority, another member of a minority, a woman called Nina Simone. She's an African-American woman. She's a very talented pianist. She was trained as a classical pianist. But she found, of course, that being Black, she couldn't, she was discriminated against, and she was a person, therefore, with a disability. Her mother was Black, her father was Black, and she was Black. And that's an incredible disability you can carry in life. So she couldn't really practice too much as a concert pianist. And she found out playing in bars, etc., was the only way really she could earn a living. She used to sing a lot of blues songs and love songs and so on. But in the early 60s, in the civil rights movement, the Ku Klux Klan murdered 4 teenage African-American girls who happened to be in a church preparing to be part of the choir for a service. And they just happened to be, unfortunately, in that place when the Ku Klux Klan bombed that church. From that time, Nina Simone wrote, which became really angry and really, really angry. And all of her music changed and her songs changed to be much more political. And she wrote a song called For Women about again, which is when I was saying about people with disabilities, people with social disabilities, physical or emotional disabilities, it's basically about people who are different, people with difference. And the fact that people can be so intolerant of difference always amazes me, how people can be generous, but about 10 times as much, it amazes me how much they can be intolerant of a difference which doesn't harm them, it doesn't harm society, it doesn't harm them at all. And yet this intolerance of being different. And so the 4 women are 4 women living across ages and lifestyles. As I've become older, I've learned that ageism is also a difference, that people can be very intolerant about you because you're older. So I've always wanted to create or put together an exhibition about this fact of 4 women of different ages, different lifestyles, and different personalities. So I did this. I did create this exhibition for women, mainly for Aboriginal women. But then I thought about it, and I thought, well, I'd call it 4 women double. There'd be 4 Aboriginal women and 4 non-Aboriginal women who are discriminated against, who are different societally, who suffer, who bear a disability of some kind. For Aboriginal women, it goes without saying that they carried a disability all of their lives. The 4 non-Aboriginal women, though, happened to be a refugee, Nassim Nassar, who is a refugee from Iran, who eventually ended up coming to live in Australia. She carried that disability. The 2 other women, there were 2 other non-Aboriginal women who had connections to the Roper River district in the Northern Territory, where an Aboriginal group there, whose land was this Roper River area, was subject to a struggle to stop a mining company taking over their land and destroying the environment. And if you go to this place, Roper River, it's very beautiful. It's very hot, of course, in the dry season. It's incredibly hot. It must be one of the hottest places I've been to, in fact. But it's a really beautiful place. And this mine will destroy that environment. It will destroy the spiritual nature of that place, and it will destroy the people of this place. Now, they've been fighting at this for hundreds of years, nearly 100 years. They've been fighting authority in this place. That is colonial authority. Carolyn Strawn, a filmmaker, feminist filmmaker, a political filmmaker, she shot a film there with one of the Alessandro Cavadini in 1979, a film called Under Two Laws, about these people's lives and their struggle that against colonial power. And of course, the latest colonial power was this mine that's going to create this huge hole in the ground. The mine people have such an ego, they are going to shift the river in order to have their mine the minerals they're looking for. Now, to shift a river there, if you've been to the Northern Territory, as I said, it's one of the hottest places I've been to in my life. But in the wet season, it floods. And you can look from horizon to horizon, and the whole of that land is underwater. Now, what that will do, I suspect, I think it's pretty true, that when that mine comes into existence and the wet season happens, that will leach an incredible amount of caustic chemicals, toxic chemicals, into that system that has an effect on the whole environment, on the Aboriginal people, but it will leach, it will flow into the Gulf of Carpentaria and will completely poison the Gulf of Carpentaria.
Sorry, John, this is me ringing the...
Ding, ding, yes. So, and the other person, because the other non-Aboriginal person was Therese Ritchie, who is currently involved in this struggle. However, it was without any effort or any thought that Wart had completed a set of self-portraits when she originally had her emotional problem, when she was originally put it into, diplomatically call hospital. And she created these portraits, and they were 4 forceful, really expressive portraits. But I put her into the show to talk about this case of, again, people being different, but being classified as a problem. One of the things politically you do, authorities do, of course, is they name people who create political problems. You must be mentally deranged. You must be mentally deranged, that you don't want to be part of this society. You don't see the benefits, the wonderful things that this society brings you. And it's this kind of political action, of course, that women have suffered from ever and a day. The mad woman in the attic is a character, a trope of literature right through the 1800s. It's back into Greek mythology, etc. So she fitted this idea of 4 a different kind of women suffering from a different form of oppression. Now, getting back to the idea of the birds, that it's amazing how people, again, birds, can be shunted away. To make Sydney, the city, happen, to make every country town happen, usually those habitats of those birds, floodlands, are filled in. They're built over, and they are destroyed for those birds to live there. And so, in effect, you have this whole society of ibises now live like other minority groups. Aboriginal people, we're forced off our land. Other people that are different are forced into the marginal places of the city. And so I thought, again, politically, this thing of taking the ibis into this exhibition was, again, a political statement, a statement of empathy with another minority group, another disadvantaged group, another group disempowered and moved off because they are different. And I think that that to me was a thing of why this was going to be a great exhibition. But I mean, the character in these images of these birds, if you think of, as Aboriginal people do, that native species are like us. They are anthropomorphic beings that we relate to. I recently wrote, just now, I wrote an essay. I'm, funnily enough, a patron of an art competition. The law firm Kingswood Mullison run an art competition. And I wrote an essay about this year's event where I began with about mapping and about areas, like I said, the bits of land that are filled in and people are moved off, animals are moved off, and so on. But I used a quote from the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And at the end of that long poem, there's a statement about really the moral of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is that we should have empathy and feeling for all other beings, all other creatures in the world, other people that are different. And that's really embodied in this exhibition. It's they're just great paintings. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Djon. That was so wonderful. I'm just conscious of the time, and there's some very cool questions in the chat room, and I think we should bring our wonderful guest of honour, the artist Wart, into the frame. And I want to be cheeky and I ask Wart a question. Wart, you conceived, as Beck said, of a really fine set of discussions and programs to accompany your exhibition. How have we delivered today on your expectations of what this conversation might?
Look, it's been fascinating, and it's a great thing to see people discussing things that are different and that are current to a lot of people. And it's good to highlight it. I just think, and it's unfortunate that the pandemic's doing its business, but we're all doing it. This is my first Zoom. I'm so excited.
Yeah, thank you, Wart. Yeah, Zoom is one of the great things of the pandemic. That's no doubt about it. It's a wonderful way of connecting. Djon and Beck, there's some brilliant questions in the Zoom. And I am particularly drawn to the question from Anthony Duke. Well, I'm just going to very quickly say my 2 bobs worth, because as convener, I won't talk about my experiences working with people with disability, but it's been part of some of the best experiences of my curatorial life. And I absolutely I'm very empowered by Beck's theoretical references in terms of the social model and such. I think there's a whole host of practitioners that are utterly inclusive, but we always going for good art. Look at Wart, that's so amazing. First and foremost, she's a wonderful human being and a brilliant practitioner. But I see some really deep engagement in this space, and I also see some tokenistic engagement. That would be my summary response. Beck?
Yeah, I think there's both things going on. I think, you know, if we're really serious about creating change, then we need to change how institutions operate. I mean, that's really the biggest kind of solution to that problem. And if we seek diversity in these spaces, then people of diversity need to be in charge, you know, of making those decisions. And, you know, however, there's some, you know, I just think, like just this year with something like the Archibald, for instance, for the, I think, is it the 2nd year in a row or maybe more, the artists who are represented by Studio A have competed and gotten through the selection process for that program. They were, that organisation and their artists were involved in doing a massive mural all the way down that sort of entranceway to the Art Gallery of New South Wales. So I do think that there's a lot of appetite for that kind of inclusion on its own, like, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely meritorious and should be there. But I think the bigger questions around what we want to see representing our culture. Do we want to see an elitist representation of art and of experience, or do we want to be seeing the diversity that is our kind of cultural experience? And I think we all have a part to play in that and in making space for people.
Another really perspicacious response. Thanks, Beck. What about you, Djon? How do you feel about our sector and the way we work in terms of inclusion and difference, and this question around tokenism and virtue signalling?
Yes, I think I was thinking about this. That people say you should have empathy with other people, and of course that common saying about you have to walk a mile in my shoes. Well, of course, really to understand, you have to put the right shoe on the right foot and the left foot shoe on the left foot. Otherwise, you're going to fuck it up. That's going to be a very awkward walk and a very mixed empathy at all. And I think that's part of that struggle. I've lobbied and did lots of arm wrestling and whatever to get. So now you have there's an Aboriginal artist on the board of the New South Wales Art Gallery. So, and they appear in the Archibald, say, for instance. I think we've moved quite a bit. It's like I said, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And if you take the other thing I was just talking about, making sure you put the right shoe on the right foot, so you're not stumbling around. It's to let, as Beck said, to let those people to take charge of those things, to take charge of exhibitions, or to put themselves forward to be in those things, in those projects, those competitions, etc. It's otherwise it's we've got to tick a box here. I'll just have to say this, then I'll shut up. Wesley Enoch said the other day on the radio, ABC radio, and he said, well, we actually have Aboriginal curators in every institution. We have Aboriginal art collections in every place. He said, but the problem is it's a tick the box thing, because a great number of those, from my experiences, they're all trainees. They won't take someone like Wesley into a role, or not Wesley, but people like that who are major players in the cultural world of Australia, and yet they can say, oh, well, we've got an Aboriginal curator, but it's someone on training wheels, you know.
Yes, I can only agree with you. There's some brilliant curators in our institutions. I don't understand why there's not First Nations directors in our institutions in this country.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's a really good question here. The last question, I think, since looking at the clock, there's a wonderful question from Alia Timmins. Again, I'm going to be cheeky and say, in my experience, I did a massive project on working with people living with schizophrenia and people who love people with schizophrenia. And as Djon and Becca pointed out, this is just part of the wonderful diversity of life. I've worked on other medical situations, and in my experience, the medical people are the hardest to crack. They are part of that system that Beck has referred to, in my opinion. But Djon, what do you think?
Yes, I think so. We in the people with difference, we have to change the whole society around. Now, that's the biggest problem. We have got a lot of things, like a lot of buildings now have ramps, so people with disabilities can get into those buildings. We've put lifts in lots of places so they can get to the 54th floor without a lot of trouble, or whatever, or just across the railway track. So it makes them visible. People are then visible. They're seen around. They're seen. But it's an enormous thing to change around. It's the incipient racism or bias is, it's generational. It's more than generational. It was built by the empire. And so just to even change that. But I did do an acknowledgement of country to start this thing. Once upon a time, I would have toasted the Queen, but I did do that. So that is a practice, although it's contested violently by some other lunatic fringe. But it's a practice. So we have gone forward quite a bit. It's about we Aboriginal people in this sense, that we don't all have to become upper middle class people. We can still be different. That's the thing that you have to realize, that not everyone wants to, own an enormous house somewhere with a big mortgage and have the 3.2 killed children or whatever, and a car and a Lamborghini in the car park. We still got to think about that we have to live with difference. And it's so curious because Australia is built on these laconic characters, the sentimental bloke. These people are different. My brilliant career, they're about people that are different. Mm-hmm. They don't want to fit into the classic box of life.
Thank you very much, Beck. Any final comments on this question?
Yeah, I think, look, I've worked with a lot of artists that have had very good experiences of collaboration with specific medical practitioners. But I think it's always that sort of strain around the ability then for a total or sort of institutional adoption of a particular kind of model or way of working when the institution itself is just under so much financial pressure and stress and is, as we see day to day, there are challenges always being faced by the medical profession in sort of being able to just do the basics, I think, and coming out of COVID with people not going to the doctors, and then sort of bigger health issues come up, you sort of get a system that's in a state of overwhelm, on top of the fact that we have an ageing population, and this is going to be a continuing sort of area of pressure. But, a lot of artists have worked with fantastic people in medical research and, heart surgeons, people working on sort of neural development and the reconstructions of neurons and things like that, in spinal injury, people working in children's health, so George Coote, thinking of his work in creating this wonderful tool that would actually help children to get their heart rate down before having painful procedures. So I do think there is a keenness there, but I think it probably needs to be, I think we have some things coming up. Like I think there's some federal policies coming up around art and mental health, which I think is basically about the adoption of sort of art and health practices by the general population. So I think we're starting to cut through on the sort of benefits of creative activity. And I feel like artists with lived experience have an enormous amount to contribute to that conversation.
Hear, hear. Well, I feel humbled by everyone's contributions today. This is the time for thank yous. Especially thank you to the audience. If you weren't here, it would be just an echo chamber. Everyone's busy. Saturdays are busy, so thanks a lot. And thank you very much, Beck Dean and Djon Mundine. I have to thank Morgan Graham and Nicola Morton from I.C.E, without whom we would not have been able to do this event. I definitely couldn't do what's happening today. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Morgan. Massive thanks to Diane Larter and Rogue Pop-Up Gallery for presenting Wart's exhibition and for agreeing to collaborate with us today. And immeasurable thanks to you, Wart, both for your artworks and for organising this event. Now, I know there's some art collectors among you. In fact, the COVID has really brought out the art collector and the home decorator and everybody. Do yourself a favour, visit Rogue Pop-Up Gallery online. Some of those beautiful ibises and flamingos could still be yours. Thanks to Create New South Wales and the City of Sydney for their support of I.C.E. Pink, Black and White. At I.C.E., we have a fundraiser underway until 12 July. It's for one of our newest programs, still growing, for First Nations youth in Western Sydney. This creative career development program has been designed by these young people. It's what they want and need. Our target is 15K, and at last count, we've reached 6,100. Some of the donors are here today, and I thank you so much for your generosity. Everyone else, you've still got an opportunity to join our community of donors. Please think about coming along with us on this really special journey. Visit our website and donate today. No donation is too small, and donations over $2 are tax deductible. Finally, thank you to our core funders, the Australia Council for the Arts, Create New South Wales, who could have no better ambassador than Rebecca Dean, I have to say, Multicultural New South Wales, the Department of Communities and Justice, and Crown Resorts and Packer Family Foundations. Thank you, everybody. Over and out.
Thank you. And thanks, Wart. Thanks, Djon.
Yeah, thanks, Ward.
Good one, Wart.
Ward, speak to the hand.